What have you learned about happiness by studying the Hadza tribe? And before you go into that, who are they and where do they live?
So the Hadza are some of the world's last remaining hunter-gatherers, and they're immediate return hunter-gatherers. So they eat today what they kill today. There's no storage with them. And so they live this life of very day-to-day existence, lots of planning for the future, but not much you can actually do about it, right? They live in mostly around Tanzania, around Lake Eyasi, and there's a number of different Hadza camps around there. Now they're nomadic. They follow game and they follow, when the local water supplies are running low, they move along. So where they are at any one moment is a little hard to say. And they're also, like all original human groups, to the best of our knowledge, they're fission-fusion groups. So they break apart at points and come back together. They all kind of know each other, but there's groups that they spend most of their lives with. And then they might shift around a little bit as they grow up and things like that. So they're they're intensely studied tribe because they live exactly where humanity evolved. This is the crucible of Homo sapiens, and so we don't know, but we believe that the kind of life that they live as hunter-gatherers there is probably similar in many ways to the kinds of lives that our ancestors lived when we first left the trees, 6 million years ago, and slowly over time became Homo sapiens. So the Hadza are a really wonderful group, and they're most of what I've learned about them is from their amazing ethnographer, Frank Marlowe, who, if I remember right, passed away recently, unfortunately. But he wrote this wonderful book called The Hadza, which I highly recommend for anybody if you want to see what life was like in the ancestral worlds, and still is today in some parts of the world. Anyway, one of the remarkable things about the Hadza is their lives are incredibly difficult. I mean, as you can imagine, right? They're nomadic, so everything they own has to be portable. They have to be able to put it on their back and move along. And so even their homes are really just barely shelters. And they never know what tomorrow is going to bring. They live in basically a pre-medical world. And so historically, the Hadza have buried about almost half their children before they reach adulthood, because of course, life's very dangerous out there. And in a pre-medical world, the smallest illness can kill you. And so here they live this life that doesn't have the comforts that we have, that doesn't have the entertainment opportunities that we have, that doesn't have all these things that we have. And yet the data suggests that they're at least as happy as we are, if not much happier. And that's a fact that I found quite remarkable, and that sort of got me started on this journey.
So why is that they're as happy as us, even though it seems like on the surface we have like a nice warm house to sleep in, we have cars, we have all this technology. Why is it that they're equally as happy with us when they have almost nothing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me just say, although we don't know with certainty, I suspect they're quite a bit happier than we are. And the only data that we have on that point is this really lovely study by these Polish investigators who in Poland asked people, they wanted to make the question exactly the same. So they said, how happy have you been over the last few weeks? And the answer was happy, sometimes sad, and sad. And so they made it pretty straightforward because, of course, the Hadza aren't used to taking questionnaires, right? And so you don't want to ask it in a way that wouldn't make sense to them. And back in Poland, they found that about 50% of the people said, oh, I've been happy. Almost 50% said, I've been basically nothing but happy these last few weeks. And among the Hadza, it was over 90%. And so it seems like they're actually happier than we are. So the question then is how? How can they, in a world that's full of so much discomfort, in a world that's so dangerous, in a world where you lose almost half your children, and in a world where you don't have these vast number of entertainment options that we have, how could they be so happy? And of course, we don't know. There's so many differences between their lives and ours, it's hard to say. But what I've come to believe over time from investigating this question is that they struck a very different balance between autonomy and connection than we have. And so connection is our most fundamental need. When we left the rainforest as sort of chimpanzee-like beings 6 million years ago, we had to form really tight connections with each other because that's the only way we had to survive. And my favorite evidence for that fact can be seen in our eyeballs. So if you look at the eyeball of a chimpanzee, it's all brown. Now chimpanzees are really smart and they can tell where other members of their group are looking, but they try to disguise that fact by making their eye brown so you can't see when they shift their gaze. Humans have evolved whites to their eyes so that if I look over there, it's like an advertisement of the direction of my gaze. You can immediately tell where I'm looking. And what that in turn tells you is that it must have been to my advantage to let you know what had drawn my attention. Because if it was a threat, you would come over and help me deal with it. And if it's an opportunity, you would come over and help me achieve it. Whereas for a chimpanzee, it's other members of the group are competition. They don't want them to know what's attracted their gaze. And so that was our most fundamental need, was this need to cooperate, this need to connect. Secondarily, though, human beings have lots of different ways they can become a success in life. And so our next most important need is for autonomy, for self-governance, because that allows me to decide where my best prospects are, what's going to make me a success in life, and then pursue that path. So I might think, oh, I want to be the best hunter, but you and I go hunting and you keep getting the kill and I keep not getting it. And I go, okay, Brian's a better hunter. Nothing I can do about that. I've tried. Maybe I could be the best arrow maker. And so my sense of autonomy allows me to decide where my prospects are and then pursue those. Now, the problem, of course, is that if I form connections, I have to dampen my autonomy. If you and I are going to do something together, I have to cooperate and I have to come to some resolution with you if we disagree. And so I have to compromise all the time. But therefore, I have to dampen my autonomy. But if I want to be autonomous, I have to dampen my connections. If I say, well, I really want to be the best arrow maker, and you say, hey, come on, Bill, I'm going for a walk. I say, oh, I've got to stay here and practice making arrows, right? So I sort of disrupt my connections. Now, what I've come to believe over time is that our modern world has disrupted that balance, and that when it's what we call an evolutionary mismatch. That we used to have a balance very equal between autonomy and connection, if anything, weighting connection quite a bit higher, and now we've shifted in the opposite direction. And I think that's making us unhappy.
Do you also think it's something else that contributes to them maybe being happier to us is that they are closed off from the outside world and they're not constantly like thrown comparisons, or that like they're not constantly shown like people that seem to be better and living better than them? Because that's something that we have, is that like, especially with our phones and social media, like we're constantly bombarded about how someone else is better than us. And that, I feel like that can contribute to our unhappiness too.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, what you say is completely correct. And so lots of things in the world are positive-sum games. And so, for example, the world has become wealthier over the last 100 years. 150 years ago, 90+% of the world lived in abject poverty, and 90+% of the world was illiterate. Now here we are where it's only 10% of the world who are still in abject poverty. 10% more than it should be, obviously, but way better than 90%, and only 10% of the world is illiterate. And so the world has become a much safer, better, nicer place, and that rising tide has lifted all boats. But as you point out, status is a zero-sum game. When you rise in status, it has to be relative to the rest of us, and so I have to diminish. And as a consequence, even though we've all become wealthier, the status game has stayed the same. Now, as you point out, the Hadza aren't sitting on social media going, oh, look at this guy with these amazing arrows he made over in that other group, right? Whereas no matter what it is that I do for a living, I can get on social media and see someone who does it better. So the Hadza had the big advantage that they could basically be the best in their group at something. They could find their niche, and they're going to be the top one or two people in their entire group at whatever that niche is: storytelling, medicine, arrow making, hunting. You choose, you name it, whatever they do. But we can't do that anymore. I was on social media the other day, and there was this person arguing that LeBron was actually not a great athlete, that he was not even in the top 10. And it's so absurd that you're trying to take down somebody with this ridiculous athletic ability. And so if I can read somebody criticizing his athletic ability, think how I feel about mine. And so yes, you're absolutely right. Part of the problem has been that we engage in these social comparisons because it was really important to our ancestors to find what they're best at and try to be good at something. But now those social comparisons can only hurt because there's just too many humans that we have access to.
I also feel like nowadays the bar is so high, and I feel like that's dangerous in a way, because like it can almost be, you set like unrealistic expectations for yourself. And like anything less than those, like if you're not a millionaire by 25, like your life is a failure. And so I feel like that's another part of it too, is that we're setting our expectations and our standards way too high, to honestly a point where sometimes it's just straight up unrealistic.
Yeah, I think you're right about that as well. And so there's both a benefit and a cost to the fact that there's so many opportunities available to us. And so if you're a hunter-gatherer kid, if you're a Hadza growing up, nobody asks you, what do you want to do for a living? You do what everybody does, which is hunt and gather. That's just what humans do. But a person in today's world can be anything. And people ask little kids all the time, what do you want to do for a living? And what you're meant to do is kind of find your passion and then try your hardest to be the best at it. And as you point out, people are doing such crazy, amazing things that to actually even come close to matching them is just impossible for almost all of us. You have to be both this combination of genetic perfection in your domain and then outlandish dedication to it, to ski these crazy down the face of the mountain the way people do, or to, do this crazy. I was watching somebody paragliding, like, base jumping and like landing into a moving plane. I mean, the kinds of things that people can do are outrageous. And 99.99% of humans would end up as hamburger if they even tried to do that, right? And so you set up, because there's so many of us, there's going to be somebody who's 5 standard deviations better than the mean at everything. And therefore you get to see those people all the time. And so you can set these crazy standards of what you think you ought to be able to achieve. And furthermore, you then have to decide which of all these 10 gazillion possibilities you'll go after. And that's kind of intimidating too. There's almost too many choices.